Louise Bedford here. I'm about to interview Ted Hurst. You know, every so often a trader comes along who has the right work ethic, the right methods, the ability to be able to conceptualise complicated matters and make them simple. And that man is Ted. Ted came to me a number of years ago. Every piece of homework that I set for him, he did. Instantly, he'd read every book that I suggested and he followed instructions so well. And you know what the amazing thing is here, is that the markets are equal opportunity employers. It makes no difference as to your gender, your colour, your background. It only respects whether you're educated in the markets themselves and your ability to apply discipline. Ted is one of those people. Ted is over double my age, but he was still willing to take instruction. I have to say, I'm absolutely inspired and I'm sure you will be too. Listen closely to this interview. Louise Bedford here. I'm about to interview Ted Hurst. Now, Ted has had a variety of different background experiences, certainly in management, and right now he's moved down to Melbourne from Darwin. Welcome, Ted. Can you tell me a little bit about your background, Ted, and what led you to become a trader?
I'd retired and had come to the conclusion that watching grass grow wasn't bloody interesting. So I thought, two things. I thought, firstly, I've always been interested in shares, but I've never done anything about it. Secondly, although I have no trust in the general information you get from companies about their shares, I've always had the question of the value of technical trading.
Yes.
So I decided at 80 or thereabouts that I should find out whether it worked. And if it did, then I should develop it on the basis that if I could develop it, others in my age group could do the same thing.
I think that's an excellent idea. And a lot of long-term retiree people with their superannuation, some of them find that it's a bit scary to be able to begin trading the way that you've done.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to them?
Well, for the moment, I would say don't be scared, because before you even think about putting $1 on the table, you should get to understand your subject very well and also yourself very well. Now, if you do some steady reading of a number of accepted authors, not everybody and his dog, but a number of accepted authors, and get a broad feel for the subject and then begin to quietly paper trade, you will be able to determine for yourself whether or not the technical analysis principle works. And if it works, you could then say to yourself, well, that would allow me to make a sensible step that was not loaded to the ears with risk.
Exactly. In the years that we've known each other, Ted, and we've been talking over the email, I've found it really interesting how you've been able to use your experience to be able to kick-start your career as a trader.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a bit about the background that you've had in terms of your experience and how you've been able to apply your experience to becoming a better trader?
As a general thing, I've lived a working life in a succession of semi-management and management jobs that have all forced me one way or another to look hard at how to solve a problem I'd never encountered in the past. And so looking at something and working out how to make it work has been the nature of my work experience. I became involved in the entrepreneurial side of mining in the Northern Territory. And that took me fairly deeply into an understanding of mining companies and how they work and the minerals and all of that sort of thing. And so I gradually got a feel for what you would call the speculative area of mining finance. And so I could look at something and say, well, that doesn't make sense, or it does make sense, because I began as a kid in a mining district where we were scratching for gold in the tail end of the Depression. and to add to it what was going on in the Northern Territory, to succeed in making a bit of money out of it also, gave me a background in at once understanding companies, and therefore it gave me a basis by which I could look at mining companies and what they had to say and just decide whether or not it was nonsense.
That's it.
And so, and a lot of it is nonsense. Absolutely. So, on deciding to look at technical trading, the objective was to basically add to income. But I spent, I suppose, 2.5 years paper trading, did quite well in parts, average in other parts and so forth. But that allowed me to get to the stage of knowing that if so-and-so occurred, then you should take this action. In other words, the action was always signalled by the graphs.
Yes.
And that was very important, because once I realised that, then I thought, company reports don't mean much, and as the market becomes a bit rocky, they mean practically nothing, because I could point right now to about 7 or 8 mining companies who've got marvellous prospects, absolutely glorious. You know, there's one in particular that I looked at where the gold grade in the ground is just beyond belief.
Spectacular, yeah.
But nobody is buying their shares.
Yes.
Nobody at all. So we're into a situation, in my view, where the company reports don't mean a thing. People are afraid. And knowing that people are afraid and pulling back, you know that you must pull back yourself.
Yes. So really what you're doing is you're using your fundamental information to give you a bit of a tip-off, but then the charts are telling you when to engage the trade.
I take the view that the only thing that is objective is the chart. It's the only thing that is not influenced by clever accountants.
Exactly. So Ted, do you feel that your age is an impediment or an attribute when it comes to
I think it's an asset.
trade? I think so too.
I think it's an asset. But there's a qualification to that. It's an asset providing you don't listen to all the nonsense you've heard about old age. Because, you know, from when you're very young, people say, oh, I'm getting old, and and when you get old, past that sunny boy, and that applies to both male and female.
It does.
And so you, long before you're an old man, you are saying, well, that's how I'm going to be.
Yes.
Now, that's bullshit.
Yes.
Absolutely. The thing about it is that you will never be old as long as you make tomorrows. As long as you say, I'm working and I'm going to achieve that. It doesn't matter if it's big, it doesn't matter if it's small. What's important is that it matters.
Yes.
And that if you have the view that you will fill the rest of your life with things that you want to do, and if you're retired, if you've never had time to do, then it can be a very, very rich developing time in which you'll find a level of maturity that you never believed existed.
I totally agree. I'm actually quite hooked on reading some books at the moment about the brain and what happens to our brain throughout different life phases. One of the things that they've found, and certainly with the people that I've trained that are, say, over the 60, 70 age group with trading, neuroplasticity, which is how the brain changes itself dependent on our experiences, really kicks in. The people that I've been able to train of this generation actually take a little bit longer to learn some of the basics, but once you've got them cemented in, like just glued. Like there's no way that you'll ever have to relearn those lessons.
That's right. That's exactly right. Because the thing about it is that for so much of the time you run, as it were, as an automaton on the basis of somebody else's views, and you don't question the views. And so, now, without wishing to sound anti-religious or anything like that, I want to make a point that's been well stated over the years by many people. Back in about the 14th century, a pope said, "Give me the child till it's 7 and I will give you the man." That means, of course, basically that what is absorbed by the child in that period will never be re-evaluated.
Yes.
But great thing about the sort of old age you can enjoy is that whenever something turns up in your mind, you are free to say, "What a lot of bloody rubbish." You are free to say that and say, "Now let's sort this out."
Yes.
And that is where the real growth, and that's where the real rewards are, because you've taken a lifetime to get a heap of experience, and now suddenly you're free to apply it.
Yes.
And use it to develop, and to get not only to know what the subject in which you're interested in, but also, more to the point, to get to know yourself and to discover things in you that you've never had time or freedom to express, and are now free to get on with that and to discover what it means to go your own way in the real sense of the word.
Completely. And certainly from the information that I've been receiving about brain changes, it's one of the ways that you stay young. I mean, look at the way you've been able to learn the piano again, you know, you've been able to reinstate that into your life.
Yeah.
All of those types of things. Actually, one of the things that they were saying, that the best thing that you can do for your brain over the age of 60 is to learn a different language.
Yeah, that's right. Because that's when you set out to learn something new, you don't then behave by reflex.
Yes.
You are then reaching into the relative unknown, and to do that you must bring your analytical capacities back to bear on the thing. Whereas before then, it's more convenient and easier to say, "Dad said,"
Yes.
"Mum said," or "he said," and so forth. But that's not you thinking, that's you behaving as an effect to somebody else's cause.
Yes.
And so to get to the stage where you can become your own cause in what you're doing, that is the stage when you become the individual that you are, rather the individual that you were persuaded to be.
Very good. So what do you feel are the main lessons that you've learned about the market at the moment?
Nothing new about it, I suppose. It has repeated precisely what has occurred in the past a number of times, and it's well described in some of the boom-bust books. We are in a situation where a handful of bad financial activities have lodged the entire world into a recession. The important thing, I suppose, is to understand that the past history is pretty indicative of what the present history will be and what the future history will become.
Which is probably why you like charts too, because what we're doing is looking into the past to be able to work out, okay, what's the likely future direction.
That's there. You're working on probability.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's no certainties in this game. Absolutely, I always suspected that was the case. I'm sure of it now, absolutely sure. But you can work on probabilities. Now, if you consider probability and consider then the important thing was not so much when to get into a stock, but when to get the hell out of the stock.
Exactly.
Then you've got a fair chance of conserving your capital and perhaps with a bit of good fortune maybe making $1.
Yes, yes.
But in the process, you will not be chucking your house on the rubbish heap.
Yes.
And that's quite important, because if you put yourself in the situation where you're dealing totally with unknowns, you will live in fear whether you believe it or not.
Yeah.
Because man's response to the unknown is fear. And the associated mental activity of fear is shut down the brain and run like buggery.
Completely. And I think that's what's happening in the charts as well. You can see people absolutely shutting down positions and leaving. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So I think the overall comment I would make that has meaning for me as an old fart is don't throw away your experience. It is valuable. It is a yardstick. If you get to not only use it, but also to question it, you can bring its lessons into the present, and those lessons are very important. They're important because they are part of you,
Yes.
whereas the stuff that you read is part of him, her, they.
And the thing that I've been impressed with as well, Ted, is that you've done a heck of a lot of research. You haven't just jumped into a situation that's unfamiliar. You've read books and you've been in contact with me for years.
These days, when I read something. Now I'm going to say something about you directly. What the acceptors writers say is pretty standard.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter whether American, Timbuktu, or whatever, it's pretty standard. And a lot of times it's not convincing. And you are inclined perhaps to wonder whether they're writing the book as an ego thing or a look at me dad thing or whatever. But here and there you'll come across somebody who doesn't seek to persuade you, but in fact holds up their own experience for you to measure against your knowledge of people. That's what your books do. They give a measure of you and your growth into that game, and in doing that gives, in my view, an added sense of integrity related to the content of what you write.
Thank you, Ted. That's really great. Thank you so much for your time today. I've really appreciated the efforts that you've gone to, as well as our friendship.